Welcome back, and you're watching Sports Federation TV. And before we continue with our next segment, if you're Cape Townian, then you probably got a thing for bashoes. And today we're running a nice competition where you can win a case of assorted bashoes right here from the show. So take your phone out and you can SMS bashoes to 33090 for your chance to win a case of bashoes. As promised, Racing Pigeons is here, and it's the Racing Pigeons Confederation of Western Cape.
Western Cape Provincial Racing Pigeon Federation.
And thank you, Mr. Erwin Wallendorf, for joining us.
Thank you.
You are an administrator and a competitor in your sport.
Yes, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Western Cape Provincial Racing Pigeon Federation. There's 1,620 competitors in the Western Cape, and obviously it's the entire Western Cape. I've been a competitor most part of my life. I started racing pigeons before I even went to school. As a family, we're the oldest racing pigeon fanciers in the country, and we started racing pigeons, my grandfather, in 1903, and I carry on that legacy. I'm enjoying it. It's sometimes quite a lot of hard work as far as one of the administrators are concerned. The Western Cape Racing Pigeon Federation is in actual fact a strategic body to the pigeon fanciers in the Western Cape.
Erwin, for our viewers at home, well, for the benefit of our viewers at home who are not familiar with this particular sport, can you please describe it for us?
Well, pigeon racing has over the millennia, and what I mean by that is in the last 5,000 years, pigeons have been used as messengers. We all know the story, or 90% of the world are aware of the story of Noah and the Ark, a pigeon returning with a branch in its beak to indicate that land has that is possible to leave the ark and walk on dry land. The pigeon in itself is a symbol of peace that is used worldwide at 4 different Olympic Games. Pigeons were used in different forms. I think the Olympics in London, people were riding bicycles around the stadium. Huge pigeons, but it is really a symbol of peace. Any event that's got to do with tragedy, I say every event, many events where there's tragedy, people release pigeons. When people get married, sometimes they release white pigeons. So pigeons is really a symbol of peace. And
so if an individual or many individuals attended an event, would they basically be seeing a release of pigeons who would go to a certain destination and return?
That's quite correct.
And then they would be timed and
the decision and declaring a race would be on velocity, and that velocity is obviously determined in meters per minute, and it's calculated to the second decimal point of a second. So in other words, if a pigeon could race at a speed of 1,600 meters, 0.56 as a part of a decimal. Yes, and pigeons are normally transported in big transporters. Fanciers come to the clubhouses, sometimes large halls in the Western Cape, and they load the pigeons in what we call a pannier. Some people call it a basket, and they get loaded onto a huge transporter, and they're taken to a destination, a predetermined destination. And that destination is obviously with GPS technology nowadays determined. So you might have to go to, say, Beaufort West, and you find that there's stormy conditions in Beaufort West. You move out the area, and then you have a GPS technology with you, and that will determine the exact point that you release your pigeons, and that message will be sent to your race secretary, who in actual fact calculates the velocity on behalf of each member in his club or union.
If I understand that this particular sport dates back to 240 AD.
That's correct.
So there would have been more traditional, let's say, primitive methods of determining the winners and the pace and the speed.
Yes.
And now with all the technological advancements like GPS and those kind of things. 20 years ago, or say 30 years ago, how were people determining the winners of these races? And is the pigeon the athlete in this scenario?
The pigeon is the athlete. It's extremely difficult if you're part of the sporting environment, and as you know, there's I think 72 different sporting codes. It's very difficult to define who the athlete is, but I think the two go in tandem, and the athlete really is the racing pigeon, like a race horse. I don't want to mention any other type of animal because I think those should be the only two animals that we in modern day, as far as green movements and so on are concerned, that we should only use those two animals for racing. And we must do that with care. Nevertheless, you find that 30 years ago we were migrating towards technology, and the technology being computerized calculations. Before that we had timepieces which were derived from the timepieces used on railway stations to clock in the time that the train would arrive.
Wow.
And those units were converted to what we call timepieces, and pigeon fanciers started using them worldwide. I've got some of them that are also, I've got one as being part of a family that has raced for so many years. I think that instrument's about 114 years old.
Sure.
It wasn't a hour, minute and second. It was almost like a sundial, and the print was done with a needle through three different pages, and they used to call it a two-dial delay. So yes, we've migrated into technology, and I think even with weather conditions, we are far more accurate in determining the conditions that pigeons should be racing in. Weather patterns change drastically within hours, and with the different weather stations we have countrywide and worldwide, we can in actual fact protect our pigeons against harm if we in actual fact look at that technology.
Well, from the timing mechanisms to the real star, the real athlete of the sport,
Yes.
how do you, is there a specific breed of pigeon that is used for these particular races?
Yes,
Is breed the right word?
Yes, you breed, and we can talk of genetics, and we can talk of the term we use for our pigeons is Columbia livia. That's a specific pigeon which is part of a larger pigeon family. You have, for instance, under the Fancy Pigeon Association, you have 232 different types of pigeons, in other words, the shapes of pigeons. But as far as Columbia livia is concerned, that's regarded as a racing pigeon. You've got feral pigeons, pigeons that just move around in townships. A lot of people look at the so-called pigeon or rock dove that occupies rooftops and that in the cities and towns, which is something that people just don't like. I don't think we should dislike animals, but it does cause a bit of problems. But pigeons, as the Columbia livia, haven't got the habit of occupying these roofs and that. We encourage our pigeon fanciers not to allow the pigeons to sit on roofs and that. They must exercise their pigeons and then call them to the lofts, as we call them. Some people have in Belgium and other places pigeon houses. It's massive. Some of them have 3-story buildings, and they've got a lift in these things. Those are the professionals. But in general, we try to contain the pigeons so that we are not a disturbance to our neighbors.
Do people bet? Do they go to these events and watch? Yes, and time?
I just mentioned to my friends earlier on who are of the other sporting codes in the waiting area that race horses and pigeons, people tend to put money on them. We're trying to discourage the spend of people because of the affordability range. Many people can't afford to raise pigeons nowadays. We make every effort to try and help those people through sponsorships and through subsidies and speaking to the right people to help with grain and feedstuffs and so on. But yes, there is a bit of money involved. There's a lot of expenditure involved to participate in the sport. That relates to club fees and the facilities that we have in clubhouses and so on. And in fact, the cost of transporting pigeons is probably the most expensive percentage of costs, other than feeding your pigeons. Feeding pigeons must be really done with top quality grain and so on.
Well, I understand that your federation has purchased some impressive new equipment to help with the transportation.
Absolutely. We recently acquired a new transporter. This particular transporter can accommodate approximately 8,000 pigeons. That's the maximum amount of pigeons we'd like to put on or submit to this transporter, preferably closer to 7,500. When we have our shorter races, that is shorter distances up to about Laingsburg and Prince Albert, which is just over 260, 270 kilometers from home. We'd like to, we then would probably populate the transporter with about 8,000 pigeons. And if it's an overnight, we could term overnight is when the distance is too great for the transporter to get there on time, to water and feed the birds before we release them. And I use the word before we release them. The interim period from arriving and releasing pigeons must be enough for the pigeon to absorb the food and water. He mustn't be flying on a full tummy or crop, as we call it, of food. And this transporter, with a lot of effort and a lot of homework, on a more scientific principle, the executive of the pigeon fanciers in the Western Cape decided to study transporters that are used worldwide, so that there's enough air movement in the truck and transporter, and that the temperature control is within a certain range when the birds are in the transporter.
Owen?
Yes.
For the benefit of our viewers at home who are maybe picturing Jason Stratham every time you say transporter,
yes.
Can we show them a picture
Yes, you can.
of this magnificent
great
equipment that you have?
If you have a look at this transport, you see right alongside it you have what we call a moving scaffold that's on wheels. To load the actual panniers, you would find that the people that load these trucks must be young enough to get up and down this scaffold, would then climb onto it. The panniers are a little bit smaller, I would say 2/3 the size of the regional panniers, so one person can in actual fact lift it and load it. You'll see that there are grids that close up against the panniers, which are on the inside. And that is for the safety of and security of our pigeons. That's the inside, and you'll see there's a grid down below. That's also on wheels, and that in actual fact facilitates the movement of the person who has to water and feed the birds.
Owen, with that particular transport, then would the fanciers arrive with their respective birds, and the birds would then collectively be transported to a race venue or a destination?
What does happen at the clubhouse? There's also the electronic equipment to register the birds electronically. It must be done under supervision. Those birds are taken out of their own personal respective panniers, handed over to somebody else, scanned across the electronic scanner, not like the old days where you had what we call rubber bands around the feet of the pigeon, and that also had a number on it, excuse me, and electronically registered and then put into these panniers that go onto the vehicle. They will then be carried across to the vehicle and under a roof, under cover, because weather conditions could impact on the birds while they're in the panniers. You don't want them to be wet.
I'm sure there's
damp.
a lot of international and, well, local regulations with regards to the welfare of the animals.
Absolutely.
So was this equipment, was it custom made? Specifically for your federation?
Absolutely. It's important to appease or to satisfy the requirements of the animal welfare organizations and the green movement worldwide. And so I firmly believe that organizations, pigeon organizations and unions and federations in our country want to be one step ahead of those requirements. In other words, we more than meet the requirements in terms of numbers placed in these panniers. It's healthier. Birds can access the water and feed or food on the pannier, and they come home in a much healthier condition. The roof of this transport is painted white to reflect the sun, so that we don't have, in our country and in countries like Australia, temperatures could rise well above 30. We don't want our birds to be affected by dehydration and so on the transporter.
Thank you for sharing this news with us, and I'm sure all the fanciers are quite excited that you have this facility available now.
Yes.
So you're Capetonian?
Absolutely.
So then I'm just going to ask you, what's your favorite flavor of bashoes?
I would say it's cream soda, and I quickly tell you why. I went to a cricket game when I was a little boy, just in my first year of school, and I was in the outer field, or outside what we call the outer field, and my uncle played cricket that day, and he actually hit a 6, and it knocked me on my head or on my nose. I was out for the count for quite a while. When I woke up, somebody had a bottle of Bashoes cream soda, and this is a true story. Cream soda in their hand, they gave it to me, and I drank this cream soda. It was probably the most wonderful drink I had in my life, because when you knocked out and somebody puts water or something into your mouth, it's wonderful. And throughout my school career, I used to drink cream soda, and my friends used to say to me, "Why do you drink cream soda?" I said, "Because I love it." And when I was in about grade 11, I realized that that particular incident made me believe that this is one of the better drinks to have. And throughout my life, I enjoyed Bashoes. The Bashoes used to deliver the boxes to our door, and it was always wonderful to hear the horse and cart, believe me, initially, and eventually a vehicle used to deliver it. And I think it was those years a matter of empowering people to deliver these things in a few rand or some money, and which was great. Bashoes is a wonderful company.
Thank you for that story, Mr. Wallenduff, and good luck with all your future pigeon races.
Thank you very much.
Well, from cream soda Bashoes to this beautiful raspberry Bashoes, remember, to win a case of assorted Bashoes, all you need to do is SMS Bashoes to 33090. After the break, we're back with black ball pool, one of the sports from billiards, and just don't go anywhere.